If you see a bus stopping in front of you near an intersection where you want to turn soon, be attentive to see if there are people getting out of the bus because you might need to give them priority. I want to turn right just after this bus, and I see this pedestrian getting out of the bus here. So I anticipate that the pedestrian will be about to cross by the time I'll get to the crossing. On top of that, there's this bus cabin here that will eventually hide the pedestrian, and students tend to have a very narrow field of view. So if they didn't see the pedestrian getting out of the bus, they probably won't see them after they appear from behind the bus cabin. Also, when you see a pedestrian approaching a crossing like here or an intersection, don't stop to yield to them only when they're almost on the crossing. Stop and yield when they're a reasonable distance from it, about 1 to 1.5 meters or 3 to 5 feet. It also depends on how fast they're moving, obviously, but if they're walking at a normal pace, it should be more or less that distance. And as we've seen in the previous video, big vehicles parked near intersections can hide other vehicles, but they can hide pedestrians too. So if you're approaching an intersection where you want to turn, and there's a big vehicle parked close to it, always visually scan to the side where you want to turn. Always make sure to establish visual contact with pedestrians whenever you're not sure if they've seen you. Until you haven't, slow down and be ready to brake. And of course, nowadays phones are almost an extension of people's bodies, so be extra careful when approaching pedestrians using them. Now here's something that'll be very important at the exam. If you're approaching a stop, you see some pedestrians, and you're not sure if they want to cross, wait a bit until you know. If they start crossing and you start advancing at the same time, you could get braked by the examiner and fail. Also be aware that pedestrians approaching a stop can change direction at the last second. Sometimes they'll change direction towards you, sometimes away from you. Whichever one it is, always wait to know if you need to give them priority before proceeding. Whenever approaching other road users that don't exactly take up the whole lane, but you don't know if you have enough room to pass them safely while staying in your lane, change lanes completely if possible, like I'm doing here with this pedestrian. If you don't have enough room or cannot change lanes, slow down until they're a safe distance from you. Now these are only a few examples. I did 3 videos on pedestrians specifically. I'll leave links for them in the description. Here I see that parked car there, so the cyclist will move towards me. But since I'll have to stop because of the traffic in front, I can stay in this lane. If I didn't have to stop, I would change lanes to the left. And don't hesitate to step on a solid line to overtake a cyclist. It's legal as long as you do it safely, of course. As you've probably already noticed, cyclists run red lights quite often. They mostly do it when there's not an apparent danger for them, but not always. So be aware of that when you see one approaching an intersection, especially in streets that have bicycle paths, where there are usually a lot more of them. And before turning, always do your verifications, mirrors and blind spot. There could be a cyclist there, especially right after a light turns green, because in that case, you didn't get to see them as you were approaching. Basically, there are a lot of other road users and they can be unpredictable sometimes, so always be aware of that when they're around. Here I know that I'll need to go into the opposite lane to go around this stopped truck, but obviously I have to yield to the traffic in the other lane and there's a car coming. So I make sure to wait behind the stop line in order not to block the intersection if the light turns red. Here I can see from afar that the bus over there is quite advanced in the intersection and the light on this axis is red. So I assume that it's waiting to turn. I don't know yet to what side it wants to turn, but I keep in mind that if it turns towards me, I'll need to leave enough room. As I approach the intersection, I can see that it is turning towards me, so I leave plenty of room. Here, as I'm approaching the intersection, I can see that this pickup truck is struggling to turn because of the vehicle in front, and I also see that said vehicle put in reverse. So as I approach, I make sure to leave enough room behind the vehicle so that it can reverse enough to leave room for the pickup. And in this case, it could have reversed a bit more to make it easier for the pickup. Also, always try to leave enough room behind vehicles when they're about to park. I can see a tiny portion of that vehicle in front flashing to the right, enough to assume that it wants to park, so I leave enough room and I wait. If I get too close, traffic can accumulate behind me, so I won't be able to reverse to let the vehicle park. Same thing here. And here I can also use the reverse lights and wheel position tip we saw in the previous video. While the vehicle's reverse lights are still lit, if the vehicle moves, its front will point towards the right, away from me. but I still don't have enough room to pass safely. Now the thing is, when the reverse lights turn off, I do have enough room, but the vehicle's wheels are still turned to the left, so if it moves, it'll move towards me. So I wait until the front wheels are turned towards the curb, that way if the car moves, its front will move towards the right. Here it's the opposite. Since the reverse lights are still on, I go while the wheels are still turned towards the street, because if the driver reverses, the front of the car will go towards the curb. In the next video, buses, both city and school buses. So stay tuned and see you soon.